Hello, my name is Kevin Christensen. I'm the host of this channel, Kevin Wonders, and I wanted to do a video about evolution because prior to maybe a month ago, I wasn't all that informed about what evolution entailed, and to be honest, I'm a little underwhelmed at what I have read so far. I will say also that on this topic of evolution, I'm sure there's a lot that I still do not know. Yet, like I said, about a month ago, I started looking into what the basis for evolution was, and found a couple of I found one book in particular called Evolution and Christian Faith by Joan Roughgarden, who was a evolutionary biologist and a Christian or Catholic, I believe. So read that, and then also read a couple articles online about evolution and the current evidence or evidences for it. And again, like just to say, I found it a little underwhelming, and in some ways very similar to any religious or any faith belief. I think one part of evolution was that it required you to really trust in the inferences that were made, and I just wasn't quite sure that the really the two solid pieces of evidence that were presented were compatible, or they were driving at the same thing, I'll say. So yeah, in the book Evolution and Christian Faith, Joan Roughgarden, she talks about really like the two major evidences of evolution, kind of boiled down, were like one, that everything has, as she puts it in the book, everything is from the same family tree. So she equates this family tree metaphor to DNA, the actual DNA sequences in all the animals in the natural world are so closely related, and so that points to a common ancestor, supposedly. And then secondly, the trait of evolution of seeing the mutations or the differences between species, and the similarities as well, again pointing to a common ancestor. And so I think these were interesting points that I was somewhat familiar with, and I had kind of was under the assumption that given the prevalence and given the magnitude that evolution has, as a like reigning belief, or not belief system, but like reigning scientific, I don't even know what to call it, house, I guess, or reigning scientific knowledge. I really expected there to be a lot of evidence that proved it. Although the evidence, it didn't to me seem that it had really like proven it to a point beyond doubt. So I think one big thing that even Darwin notices was like the fossil evidence, fossil records of these. We'll look at like one thing to start with. Look at sort of the evolution of an animal, or the evolution of a species. So yeah, one thing is saying that like if through geographic separation or migration, whatever the catalyst was, there was a separation between species, and so as the species diversified, or as they diversified geographically, they also had to diversify based on the resources that were available to them in that environment. And so the resources was like an imposing factor on what caused the species to differ from one another. And so that's why they give evidence of like looking at the Galapagos Islands, or looking at the Hawaiian Islands even, that are pretty well isolated. And so the creatures you see on the Hawaiian Islands are similar to that what you see on say North America. However, different enough, and so they say that is sort of pointing to evolution. But I mean, how I see it, that more seems like adaptation. And I'm sure it has to be a common like refutation to evolution, but that to me doesn't necessarily seem like evolution, right? That just seems like if you put think of like an Arctic fox or a Arctic bunny. Like you move them from a certain area and you put them in a very cold area. Their fur changes colors to match the snow, and all those things, all these traits, like that makes sense to me, right? That's you still have like the same fox that you have, say, in a more like jungle environment, or more of like a plain type environment, that you have also now in the Arctic. They're not like that drastically different, right? And even to call them like a different animal altogether, or a different species altogether seems. I mean, obviously I can see the difference, but there's like glaring similarities, and so I think that was one thing that stood out to me, was that when you look at, or to say that everything came from a common ancestor, and so from this common ancestor everything evolved based off of where it was living, off of its access to resources. It evolved so that it could acquire those things that it needed to continue living. And so I see that. I think I see that like with the Arctic fox, right? Like, or with the bunny, right? Like the bunny would have a higher likelihood of living if it could change the color of its fur to match the color of the snow. Makes sense, right? But what I don't see happening is like the bunny going through these like massive changes, right? Where it's like completely restructuring its entire makeup. Like you can compare the two bunnies, and they're pretty similar, like that what you see in the Arctic, and that's what you see in, say, North America, southern North America, we'll say. So that to me seemed more like a trait of adaptation as opposed to evolution. So, but they look at, especially the skeletal system, they say, of like the mouse and the bat, seeing how they're very related, and they even throw humans in that mix. And so you look at the mouse and at the bat, and you can see like, okay, similar body type, I see that. But then we obviously, the big difference is the wings, right? So they're supposing that at some point the hand like stretched out, and the thumb ended up at one end of the wing, and the other fingers ended up elsewhere. And now like the bat and the mouse share a common ancestor, but that's where I get lost, where it's like, these two things, like, while you can see some similarities, like there's some big differences between them. And to me, it seems those differences, or those things that make them different, have more weight than the things that make them similar. Where I wouldn't feel comfortable saying that they came from the same thing because of how different they are. So that's one thing that I look at, or that was like one part of the like the factual evidences for evolution, right? You have things change over time to adapt to their, or to, yeah, better suit themselves to their environment. Is that evolution or is that adaptation? I would probably say it would be the latter. But that was the one thing, and then the second thing was that everything has everything comes from the same family tree, as Ref Garden put it, or that everything has like similar DNA structures. And so I think on that point, what was interesting is that like if you accept that there are like fundamental laws of reality, things like certain weight of gravity and like general atmospheric conditions, there are certain laws in which that govern reality. And so I think if you look at that and you accept that, then it wouldn't really be a surprise then that all the life that we see in this reality, um, it has to meet a certain criteria in order to exist in this reality. I mean that in a sense of like, um, if it doesn't surprise me that a lot of things have similarities when the place they're living in is say the world they're inhabiting is one world, right? Like they're not, obviously ecosystems are different, but the same atmospheric conditions, the same like sense of gravity to some extent, um, it stays the same. And so to survive, in these various climates, these various ecosystems, yeah, I think like you'll see similarities like that to me doesn't seem like that surprising, right? Like there's a fundamental laws that are governing reality, and so in order to exist in reality, like you have to sort of submit to those fundamental laws, and creation has to sort of exist within the boundaries of those fundamental laws. Um, like these fundamental laws delimit a sense of um, um, extremes that every creature has to be either at one end or the other or somewhere in the middle of them in order to exist in this reality. And so that it doesn't seem that surprising then to me, or you would almost come to expect that things would naturally be similar because like they think of like things breathing oxygen, like you would then expect to have a similar um, operation for that, like having lungs or having some method to do that. So that to me, you would, like if things have to exist. I feel like I've said it like 4 or 5 times, but if things exist in this world, on this planet that has certain parameters, um, the the uh, the characteristics of whatever thing it is has to fall within those parameters in order to exist successfully on this world. And so that it doesn't seem surprising that we have a lot of, or the things do share a lot in common, um, because that's just that's like if something was too far extreme to one end or to the other end, it could not exist in this reality. And so yeah, when you look at like similarity in DNA between various creatures, or like even like the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, seeing similarities between that. Again, it's like it's not that surprising because of the structure of reality, right? Because it delimits a certain type or a um, certain parameters that have to be met. So those were my two things. And so yeah, seeing DNA similarities between a bunch of things then doesn't seem all that surprising. But so to me, those two things seem exclusive. They don't seem to really um, combine well, and so I think that was the problem, or that was not the problem, but that was what the evolutionary biologists were doing, where they were saying, well, we see these two things, right? Like And these are facts, right? Like I admit that. I admit that like this thing that everything has DNA in common, understandable, right? And that things change over time, what they call evolution, understandable. I admit that, and I think you can totally see that, right? Um, but what I'm saying is, do these things share a do they share an origin? And that's where I don't think they do. I don't think they do. So I'm reading this book right now. It's about epistemology, and it's talking about like inferences. And so when you have like these two things, you use like a an inductive inference or an abductive inference to try to draw the most likely possibility uh, between these two pieces of evidence. And so I think that like when you look at okay, similar DNA structure and then adaptation over time, well, you can put them together and you can say, so we have one thing, and from that one thing, right, we have a multiplicity of things. And so obviously we have things in common with that one thing because that's where everything came from, right? And so you take this idea of adaptation and you extrapolate on it and you make it something that is just extremely expansive. And you take the most simple organism and then you end up with something that is extremely complex and multifaceted. And to me, it doesn't quite add up, right? Like I said, those two things to me they seem exclusive. Um, they don't seem to really combine well. I mean, I can see like where I can see how you can draw that inference from those two things, right? You just say like, well, what's what's most likely outcome or conclusion that we can draw from each piece of evidence, and you say that, well, there was one thing that everything came from, and so because everything came from that one thing, everything has similar DNA, and because everything came from that one thing, everything has similar characteristics, right? Like bone structure, the similarities that you see between different species, because they all came from one thing originally. But yeah, those two things, to me, they don't really, they don't add up that well. They don't add up that well. And again, the big thing I see is that, especially with like the idea of things changing over time, again, I just, like, we're not really seeing a whole lot of drastic changes, right? And obviously, like they say, like, well, because it takes, millions of years, not something observable in our lifetime. And so I think like that is sort of one sort of touching point on like the fallibility of this idea, because it supposes that these things like must be, but again, this is kind of an inference. This is an inductive inference of just drawing the most likely conclusion between these two things, and it's like it's a compelling conclusion in some regard. I mean, look at how like popular this idea of evolution is. But again, as I had read this information and as I had looked into this a little more, I was underwhelmed at in my view, the lack of evidence. And so obviously, the first thing you look at to me was the fossil. What does the fossil record for these things look like, right? Where are these intermediary species, or these transitional species? And even Darwin brings this up of like, well, there seems to be not a lot of fossil records of these intermediary species, and even the things that they have now, they are pretty incomplete. There was one on I saw about the Tiktaalik. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but it like the most complete fossil record they had was pretty incomplete in itself. And so if you look at what they had and like what they assumed, it seemed like quite a stretch. But again, the like if there is more out there that I'm missing, like I'd be interested to read it. But that to me seems like a very it seems like a possibility, right? I'm not saying that I am I've read everything about this. I'm not saying that I'm a expert on these things. I'm just saying, like, I spent a little bit of time looking into this on the assumption that there would be some like really driving evidence, really conclusive evidence for these things, and I haven't found it yet. And so it makes me kind of wonder at some point of like, I wonder how much the average person knows about evolution, right? Like, myself not knowing much of anything about it prior to like a month ago, and then like looking into it, seeing what I found, and yeah, it seems like you gotta have quite, and I think again people say this, so I don't know if I want to say it, but I think the Christians will say like you gotta have as much faith to believe in evolution that you do to believe in God, and I think there is some truth in that. I don't really mean that in a completely negative sense, but I think there are some inferences that are drawn from the facts, that could be mistaken, and so I think like that aspect of evolution is, it seems in the common mind, or in the no, not the common mind, but in commonality, like in like the general sphere of information, those inferences almost are taken as fact, or they're presented as fact, which is misleading. And so, yeah, I wonder how much the average person like looks into these things, looks into the what's going on with evolution. So that was my take on it. It seems like you either have to believe in evolution or you believe in intelligent design. And yeah, I haven't done much research on intelligent design either. Maybe I will, and then we'll do a video at some point on that. So yeah, that's my take on evolution, and let me know what you guys think, and thanks for watching. All right, see ya.